Well, hello, Philos Project listeners. I, Simone Rizkallah, am back with one of our senior fellows, Dr. Faydra Shapiro. Faydra, it's so good to talk to you today.
Thank you for inviting me back, Simone.
I love talking to you, of course, and I always want to pick your brain. So now I get to just pick your brain as I do, but on camera and for our followers. So this issue has to do with Pope Francis, and I know it's a touchy issue. It's very sensitive, also for me, being a Catholic. But I was disappointed in the Holy Father, respectfully, when last week or very recently he, made this comment about investigations into the allegations that the war in Gaza is a genocide. And so the reason I wanted to pick your brain about it genuinely, Faydra, is because of your personal vocation and your work in Jewish Catholic relations that you've dedicated your life to. How does what is the impact of the Holy Father's statement? How does it impact Jewish Catholic relations coming from an Orthodox Jewish perspective living in Israel?
Right. So I want to say that the problem is not, to my mind, that Pope Francis suggested in this book that there might be room to investigate allegations of genocide. I mean, that I think in itself is not an unreasonable idea. The problem is that it was said in the context of regularly, since October 7th, regularly one-sided, frankly, utterly insensitive and even inflammatory comments about the war in Israel, Gaza, and also against the background of, this intense outbreak of global anti-Semitism.
Ouch. Why do you why do you think Pope Francis is taking this bias? Is choosing this bias? Because
Well,
he's clearly spoken out against anti-Semitism, and he's not anti-Semitic, obviously. And maybe we would even say, like, before the Hamas attack on 10/7, that we would look to him too, in line with Pope Benedict and John Paul II and the modern popes, in this awareness of the sensitivity of anti-Semitism and these rising rates of anti-Semitism. So why do you think the bias, and how, like, concretely would you say it puts us back?
right. Okay, so there's a lot of questions in there. Let me
Yeah.
try. Um, and I'm not really sure that I can say the cause when it comes to the war. Okay, I mean, for Pope Francis, of course, we've seen repeated over and over again. All war is wrong. All war is a loss. It's all a defeat. He's stated some variation on this theme many times, and this kind of hazy feel goodism
Mhm. Right.
avoids the immensely important question of whether some wars are just and what are the conditions for a legitimate conflict. It avoids the question of how states and peoples should respond to oppression, to cruelty, to injustice. So it's really it's a very problematic kind of wishy-washy stance to
Yeah.
take.
Yeah.
It probably isn't a surprise that it comes at the same time that, of course, the church is now deprived of its own military power. And so suddenly it's
Mm.
become very enlightened and peace loving, kind of wagging a finger at the Middle East. We have to remember that, the church waged its own holy wars in the Holy Land and
Right.
massacred tens of thousands of Muslims and Jews in Jerusalem in 1099. So, this sort of calling for peace and understanding now seems a little bit rich. So
Right.
so there is that.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of the impact on Catholic Jewish relations, before October 7th, if you had asked me about the state of the relationship, I would have spoken about the extraordinary progress that's been made in our relationship over the last 60 years, about the trust that's been built up, about
Mm,
the deep explorations and deliberations about the relationship of the church to the Jewish people, the institutions, the multi-faith groups, the clear metanoia
mm,
of the Catholic Church to acknowledge and correct centuries of the teaching of contempt. And
right.
so since October 7th, it's really hard for me to overstate the painful impact that Jewish Catholic engagement has suffered since then. Because these very careful and even-handed statements coming out of the Vatican made Jews feel that, our pain,
Hmm.
our wound, our trauma, our children uh, didn't matter, right? I mean, almost 60
Yeah.
years after Nostra Aetate, Second Vatican Council, and all of the documentary and institutional and educational fruit that emerges from it. But there's this feeling that when push came to shove,
Hmm.
the Jewish people were kind of dropped like a hot potato. And
Right.
honestly, I think the saddest piece here is that the only people who were really surprised were those of us who had dedicated our energy to Jewish Catholic engagement. Like
Right.
everyone else seemed to say some version of, why are you surprised? I told you the church would
Right.
never change, right? And
Yeah.
that's just so very painful.
Painful. Yeah, because there's not too many of you out there doing this work. So, yeah, I better understand now how that must feel. And for the average Catholic or who's listening to this, and I always kind of hope that average Catholics don't pay too much attention necessarily to the Vatican. I think we have a limited, and that's not to crit that. And I would say that with every papacy. So just in case anybody wants to read into that, in the sense of that, we each have our own personal vocations, our own missions and callings, our own limited sphere of influence to follow God in our lives. And no one's like, I'm not going to go and investigate whether there's a genocide in Gaza. That's not my calling. So for the average Catholic listening to you now, and besides like feeling the pain and the sorrow, and also praying, for Jewish Catholic relations, praying to fight against, anti-Semitism and Christian and Catholic anti-Semitism. Is there any other thing that you would really like our listeners to take away from this, or any kind of very concrete call to action?
Sure. Because if I had to you're absolutely right. I mean, God forbid, Pope Francis is not an anti-Semite.
Right.
And so if
Not
I
at
had
all.
to think of, how to describe his response, I would say that it is a profound tone deafness to the concerns and experience of the Jewish people, right? This isn't just about the war. As we said, it's about the global context
Right.
where, Jews are afraid to go to school, to wear identifying
Right.
symbols, to go to synagogue, right? So I think that really the call should be to, whatever the opposite is of that kind of tone deaf,
Right.
that is to listen. And if you're not hearing, your Jewish friends, if you're not hearing anything of the Jewish environment, then experience, excuse me, then you need to go out and find it,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
To
Yeah.
actively combat the potential for that kind of tone deafness by listening and seeking out listening opportunities. That's what I would say.
I love that, Phaedra. What a beautiful spiritual response to that. And I was on the metro yesterday and I saw a Jewish family. And I just like went out of my way to be like super friendly and super nice. I didn't want to be that weirdo that was like, hey, I work in Jewish Catholic relations, but I just, and I appreciated during the cleansing of Artsakh and Armenians when people would do that to me. There were not many, but yeah, I really appreciate that. Anything else before we say goodbye? Thank you so much for letting me pick your brain for a few minutes.
Anytime, Simone. I look forward to the next time we get to do this.
Thanks.